Welcome, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting of the Sentencing Guidelines Commission to order. Today is September 11th, 2025, and I will ask Director Reitz to take the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Castro. Castro absent. Commissioner Fraze. Commissioner Fraze absent. Commissioner Keith.
Present.
Commissioner Keith present. Commissioner Ladd.
Present.
Commissioner Ladd present. Commissioner Mazzaros. Commissioner Mazzaros present. Commissioner Middlebrook.
Present.
Commissioner Middlebrook present. Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Moore absent. Commissioner Morin. Present. Commissioner Morin present. Commissioner Mueller.
Present.
Commissioner Mueller present. Commissioner Reeves.
Present.
Reeves present. Commissioner Saxena.
Present.
Commissioner Saxena present. Vice Chair Larkin, roll call.
Present.
Larkin present. Commissioner Fraze.
Present.
Commissioner Fraze present. Chair Mitchell.
Present.
Chair Mitchell present. Madam Chair, there are 11 members present, 2 members absent.
Great. With that, we have a quorum. So we'll move on to approval of the draft agenda. Motion to approve the. Commissioner Reeves makes that motion. Do we have a second? Second by Commissioner Middlebrook. Any discussion on the agenda? And we'll vote on that.
On the motion to approve the agenda, Larkin.
Yes.
Larkin, yes. Castro. Castro absent. Fraze.
Yes.
Fraze, yes. Keith.
Yes.
Keith, yes. Ladd.
Yes.
Ladd, yes. Mazzaros.
Yes.
Did I hear a yes?
Yes.
Mazzaros, yes. Middlebrook.
Yes.
Middlebrook, yes. Moore. Moore absent. Morin.
Yes.
Morin, yes. Mueller.
Yes.
Mueller, yes. Reeves.
Yes.
Reeves, yes. Saxena.
Yes.
Saxena, yes. Mitchell. Yes. Madam Chair, there are 11 votes in favor, no votes opposed.
With that, the motion is approved unanimously. Next is approval of the draft meeting minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes, July 24th and August 13th. We didn't approve the July minutes in August so that we could spend all of our time discussing potential policy proposals. So I would entertain a motion to approve both the July 24th and August 13th. Commissioner Reeves makes that motion. Do we have a second? Second by Commissioner Middlebrook. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and take the vote on.
The Reeves motion to approve the minutes from July 24th and August 13th. Larkin.
Yes.
Larkin, yes. Castro. Castro absent. Fraze.
Yes.
Fraze, yes. Keith.
Yes.
Keith, yes. Ladd.
Yes.
Ladd, yes. Zaros.
Yes.
Zaros, yes. Middlebrook.
Yes.
Middlebrook, yes. Moore. Absent. Morin.
Yes.
Morin, yes. Mueller.
Yes.
Mueller, yes. Reeves.
Yes.
Reeves, yes. Saxena.
Yes.
Saxena, yes. We're on the approval of the minutes from July 24th and August 13th. Moore?
Yes.
Moore, yes. Chair Mitchell?
Yes.
Chair Mitchell, yes. Madam Chair, there are 12 votes in favor, no votes opposed.
With that, the motion is approved unanimously. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. Last month in August, we had an all-day meeting to sort of reveal and get some initial reactions to a comprehensive proposal that we had to change the guidelines. It included a combination of both ranking changes and policy changes. And so we talked through it substantively last month, but not, we're not to the end of that discussion. What we wanted to see next was what's the bed impact of the items that appear to have consensus. And so the staff have been working on that for us. And what I wanted to just call to everyone's attention, and so this is why you had copies of statutes in your materials, is the responsibility of the commission to also consider the capacity of our system when making decisions about ranking. So if we're having a larger package that we are potentially going to propose, we have to make sure that we can pay for the bed impact, or that the bed impact for the system. I honestly thought I would be saying to you, so that means we're going to have to find some compromise to bring down some more beds, and what we saw is different than what I expected it to be. So I just wanted to make sure that the commission is thinking about this. There has been a commission in the past that made some changes that did not take bed impact into account, and really became a huge point of discussion at the legislature when we couldn't afford it. So, so let's keep that in mind as we go. Is there anything that you want to say about the capacity constraint that's in our law? You pulled it for us, Nate.
Yeah, no, just that as you can see, it was in the 1978 charter statute, and it continues to be in the statute today, that is one of your considerations, the limited to the capacities of local and state correctional facilities.
Great. So keep that in mind. Oh, did you want to say something else? Oh, sorry, Commissioner Price.
Madam Chair, do we know, does the Department of Corrections know what the impact of closing Stillwater is?
Can you say that a little bit louder? I can't quite hear
Oh,
you.
do we know what the impact of closing Stillwater is on this total state prison capacity?
That's a really good question, and I don't think we know that 100%. What I do know is that right now we are in the process of doing the halfway point where we're reducing the capacity of Stillwater down to half of its normal capacity. His normal capacity is about 1,100, and we're reducing it down to 550 right now, and we have the room for the first 550 to go to other facilities. The numbers have dropped enough. Just post-COVID numbers haven't rebounded, so the numbers have dropped enough that we have the ability to absorb that. But I am embarrassed to say that I didn't ask the question about the other 550, so I can find that out, and
Your impression is that there's already unused capacity in the other prisons, that even if we vacated Stillwater tomorrow, we wouldn't be overcrowded.
I don't know the answer to that. That's what I'm saying. With the other half, I don't know the answer to that.
Madam Chair,
Mhm.
I can tell you that the information that I got from DOC's website, obviously I'm not a DOC employee, but the information that I presented back in, I think, June, when this was, we met and discussed that, would you like me to do that, Madam Chair?
You got something from
I
DOC?
got from just publicly information, just static information that was on the DOC's website, just doing the numbers at that.
You can. I'm not sure if that's gonna.
No, I'm certain it's not necessarily accurate today, but I guess sort of for what it's worth, the published capacity of Stillwater what is 1,626 men. The population as of July 1st, 2024, so this is very dated, was almost 1,200 men. But looking at capacity, as of July 1st, 2024, again, this is over a year ago, DOC's adult male capacity 8,848, exceeded its adult male population by 1,358 men. So that was just adding up the capacities of all the prisons. So the way it looks to me is that the reduction in capacity of 1626 would exceed the margin that the DOC had, at least of July 1st, 2024. So just looking at those paired numbers, there would appear to be, you know, as the way things were over a year ago, there would be appear to be a capacity crunch if those 1626 were just to go away.
And if we were to use the 95% rule that the commission used in 1980, I don't know if it's used it ever since. The idea being that you have to have some extra capacity just to run a safe and effective prison. So anyway, that's, I think, a context for the question we face right now about
Yeah.
the impact of our changes.
And then it also, you know, so one of the reasons why I say it won't be accurate today, this is a really good benchmark though. But the reason that won't be accurate today is because what has sentencing looked like since then, and what have, you know, I know that we've had a little spike in admissions too. So that also changes the total equation, right? So, and I can't remember, I don't even know if we know if that spike, I don't think I've ever gotten enough info to know if the spike is like new or release return. But,
Madam Chair, based on what statute though, we're also taking into consideration county jail population that DOC could contract with, and we don't have that information as well. So there might be capacity through county jail systems throughout the state, correct?
yes. Yeah, so I mean, that's true. And that is true that if we reach capacity, one tool we have at our disposal is to potentially contract with county house people out of that cost, that's dollars too, so that's also an issue. Commissioner Ladd.
I had some comments, and I don't know if that was, I have to wait for C or if now is right, but I had some comments regarding capacity and Fed impact on these policy considerations, some comments and some concerns. So I guess I defer to you as to, should I say something now, or I can certainly wait?
Well, we're, it depends, because we should have the fiscal note walkthrough so that we know what we're talking about.
Mhm.
And does it relate to just sort of reaction to the whole thing? Because if
Yeah.
it is, then maybe we get the fiscal note first.
It's
and then-
fine. I'm gonna say it either way. So I just, whenever you want to hear it, you can just let me know. I'm
Yeah,
fine.
I want to hear it. I do want to hear it.
Okay.
So let's let them do that
Okay.
first, and then we'll come back to
Thank you.
this, because it is all like A, B, and C.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, no, walk through.
All right, and I'd ask to be joined by some of the actual research staff who did the fiscal note. But, so I just want to sort of introduce what we're talking about here, the fiscal note. This is a process that we do with the legislature. Whenever they propose a crime bill that looks like it's going somewhere, they ask how much it's going to cost, and basically we do our analysis because we have this really magnificent data set that's been collected since 1980 on prison and sentencing. We use our information to inform the Department of Corrections on how many prison beds the bill will cost or free up, and the Department of Corrections attaches a dollar sign to it and passes it on to the legislature. So what you're looking at here is sort of a little bit of what we would be presenting to the legislature. I will say we throw in a lot of analysis. We throw in what our assumptions are. This was essentially like a dozen fiscal notes all combined into one. So it was a lot of work, and we don't have all those assumptions. We don't have them broken down. We certainly can do that if that's something you're interested in, but this is really a very high level overview of what we're looking at. One thing I do want to note though, as far as assumptions go, is that we did analyze each policy on its own. Some of these policies are going to have interplay between them, and some policies may affect other policies. We did not analyze that. We can do that. We were constrained somewhat by time and resources for this fiscal note. And we don't necessarily know for sure. I mean, the commission hasn't taken a vote on anything. So just based on, at least not a formal vote, there was sort of some mock voting exercises that occurred in August, but formal vote. So pending a little bit firmer idea of what the final policy package is, we are put off calculating the interplay between different policy proposals. We analyzed each policy proposal as really its own separate fiscal note. And the bottom line here is that we estimate that the eventual net effect, and eventual is a key word here, we don't have timing calculated on this yet. Timing will be a very interesting issue, particularly in light of something known as the amelioration doctrine, which basically says that the beginning date of some of these policy changes may be different than the beginning date of other policy changes. The policy changes that tend to mitigate a sentence or ameliorate a sentence, like for example, reducing the decay factor. So maybe I'm being sentenced and I have a 12-year-old felony that's going to drop off my record. The amelioration doctrine would say that that's by default going to go into that policy change is going to go into effect immediately, even if I committed the crime before the effective date of the change. As long as my conviction isn't final, I'm probably going to receive the benefit of the change. So that can have, that's an issue with timing on these prison beds. There's sort of two different ways. Another thing about how these prison beds are calculated is the change. There's really two ways in which prison beds can change. One is that there are actually fewer people going to prison. For example, if somebody were crossing the dispositional line due to custody status point, under the custody status point policy, that wouldn't be true anymore. So the person would, by guidelines presumption, get a stayed sentence after that, after the policy takes effect. So that would be one way to avoid prison beds, is we just have fewer people going to prison. Another way to avoid prison beds is that people would go to prison but for a shorter period of time. So say somebody's criminal history score is reduced because an old felony decayed, for example, but the person's still a presumptive commit. The prison sentence would be for a shorter period of time than we would have now. So those are the two ways to the need for prison beds. And offsetting this are some of the needs for increases in prison beds. For example, the rankings, most of the ranking changes were up rankings. And so those actually will cost prison beds. So this 827 prison beds, this number would be in fact larger if it weren't for the ranking, the up ranking. So the up rankings essentially brought it down. So they offset some of the prison bed impact from the mitigating. So I'm going to really quickly walk through the different policies. And in most of these, we did estimate the impact. There are a few where we did not estimate impact, honestly, chiefly just due to time. We tried to hit the most, the biggest rocks first, I guess. So change the felony decay period from 15 to 10 years. We did estimate that. Change the misdemeanor decay period from 10 to 7. And then there were three policies under 3 having to do with different ways of calculating misdemeanors for DWIs. We did calculate the first one. We did not have time to calculate the third one, which is deleting 2B6C, which is an interesting rule for counting prior non-felony DWIs when the current offense is a second or subsequent felony. We did calculate eliminating juvenile points from the criminal history score, specifying the state's burden to prove out-of-state criminal history. converting custody status to a durational increase instead of part of the criminal history score. 7 is omitted. That's the policy that the commission did not come to consensus on, at least as far as staff could tell. There wasn't any consensus on that. That had to do with this, whether person-related departure factors should be treated specially or limited in the scope of how they could apply. 8, adding a new departure factor for first offenders. We did not attempt to calculate that. Adding ranges to the shaded grid cells, I suppose it's possible that could have some impact. Right now, the ranges don't apply to presumptive stays, but we did not attempt to calculate that. It really won't affect, it doesn't affect how we normally calculate beds, because normally we calculate beds with commit offenses, and most commit offenses are presumptive commit offenses. And there is access to ranges, even if it's in the shaded cells. What's new here is that the shaded, the ranges will be available even for stays. And that could affect probation violations if somebody's ultimately committed on that, but it's not going to affect presumptive commit. Then we get into the ranking changes. These are all labeled 10. 10.1 is upranking criminal vehicular homicide while impaired with a qualifying prior from severity level 8 with a modifier to an unmodified. Upranking criminal vehicular operation, great bodily harm, and gross negligence, severity level 5 to 6. Upranking criminal vehicular operation, great bodily harm, impaired from severity level 6. And upranking assault 2, substantial bodily harm from 6 to 7. Upranking assault 3, substantial bodily harm from severity level 4 to 5. Upranking assault 4, actually all these assault 4s, 10.6 through 10.10. Those are all being upranked from severity level 1 to severity level 3. And upranking domestic assault by strangulation from severity level 4 to 5, and downranking, this is the only downranking, assault in the first degree resulting in great bodily harm, 8. Now you see in a lot of these uprankings, it says no in the last column. The last column is whether or not it's possible to do a demographic impact statement, which I'm going to talk about now. Demographic impact statement is where we estimate on a significant crime bill what the demographic impact is going to be. And sometimes we're not able to do it. In fact, we're prohibited from doing a demographic impact statement by the commission's policy if we don't have foundational reliability for making such an estimate. And we don't, so on some of these uprankings, and I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds here. On some of these uprankings, if something moves from a severity level, let's take assault 4, where something moves from, or assault 3, where it moves from 4 to 5. There's one square there, I think it's a criminal history score of 3, where it'd be a stayed sentence at severity level 4, but it'd be a commit at severity level 5. Well, we know 100% of those aren't going to be, because there's some mitigated departure that's going to happen. We just don't know what the rate is for those mitigated departures. We can use existing offenses to estimate the rates on, if it's higher than criminal history score of 3, say it's 4 or 5, we can use the existing, because it's going from a white cell to a white cell, so we can use those existing departure rates to estimate what the departure rates are going to be for the new offense. But we can't do that on a case-by-case basis for the one that's going from gray to white. We just have to come up with basically a general percentage. So we just apply a general percentage to that square, and that's a valid way to get the prison population estimates. But the problem is, if we just do a general percentage, we're losing the case-by-case data, which is how we get the demographic information. And once we lose that case-by-case data, we lose the ability to do a demographic statement. So that's why there's so many no's here, the demographic impact statement. I hope that was somewhat intelligible. I realize this is a little bit complicated, but I will say this, Madam Chair, we could probably refine that. And I'm explaining why there were so many, so there's a difference between the number of prison beds that we're actually estimating and the number of prison beds for which we did the demographic analysis on. And we could probably narrow that difference a little bit, if we just isolated those cells where we couldn't do it and did demographic analysis on the rest of it, if that makes sense. So we didn't do that here. So that's a change we can make to narrow these two numbers. But because of that difference, again, as you recall, the total package is estimated to avoid the need for 827 prison beds. But the policies for which the demographic impact analysis is possible avoid the need for 914 prison beds. And that really sounds a little bit odd. Like, why are we doing a demographic impact analysis on more prison beds that are actually being avoided by the policy? And that's because the policies that we can't do the demographic impact analysis for are basically those upranking policies. And that's where we lose the demographic information in our assumptions on the bed impact. So we're actually doing the demographic impact analysis on a lot of non-upranking policies. And that's, I think, something to keep in mind too when you're looking at some of these prison beds, that the people who are going to prison, some of these uprankings that we're not doing the demographic analysis on are people who are committing violent crime. And that's just something to keep in mind, because one of the things we analyzed here, this is an idea of the chair, was something we're calling criminal background quadrants. This wasn't precisely the chair's, how the chair suggested doing it, but their suggestion is, let's look at the quality of these, not just, look at who's going to prison and who's not going to prison as a result of these changes. So one simple way we thought of doing this is just dividing everybody up into 4 quadrants. So everybody's going to fit into one of these 4 quadrants. Either the current offense is a person offense or it's not a person offense. And either the person has a person offense in their history or they don't have a person offense in their history. And based on that very simple, those simple data points, we can create these 4 different quadrants. A current person offense with a person offense history, going all the way down to this is not a current, the offense that's putting the person in prison is not a person offense, and the person had no person offense history. So those are the 4 quadrants, and we also analyze that. So this is really something new that we're trying out on this demographic impact statement. So moving on to page 5. Page 5 is simply the current state demographics. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's information you've probably seen before if you've reviewed MSGC reports or demographic impact statements. But it does show the general adult, it's basically got 3 different populations that it compares demographically. The general adult population of the state of Minnesota, the annual felony population, that is to say, of the people who got sentenced for felonies each year, what was their demographic characteristic? And then finally is the prison population as of July 1st, 2023. So these are data that we get from the Department of Corrections. So that's sort of the state of affairs where we are right now. And then we look at the estimate of the demographic characteristics of this reduced prison population. And again, we're only doing this analysis for a subset of the complete policy package, we're not doing it for some of these uprankings. And this shows the demographic breakdown of each of the different categories. And then we'll talk about table 3 in just a minute. But before we get to that, this shows the 4 different quadrants. What the quadrants were of those of the policies that we can do a demographic analysis on, these 914 prison beds. And I want to point this out because the highest quadrant is that beds are being reduced for are the current person offense with a person offense history. My hypothesis is that if we were to be able to include some of those up rankings, that a lot of the offset would be in this quadrant, because those are person offenses. And, I don't know that they have a person offense history, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did, given the offenses that they're committing. So I would look to see this this percentage reduced if we were able to do a demographic impact analysis on those beds that we're not able to do the analysis. And again, we can do some of that. We can refine that in the future if it's necessary. That is just a hypothesis. I can't prove that at this time unless we started to do some of the on those beds in the ways that I was talking. The other quadrants are pretty similar to the existing non-lifer population as we estimate it to be. The other real difference here is that the current person offense, no person offense history is actually low compared to the non-lifer population as we estimate it to be. So now I'm going to take you to table 3. There's a lot of information here in table 3, and I'm not going to say it's terribly easy to read. It basically going, so the first group here where it says prison population, that's the existing prison population again. So it's essentially information that you would have gotten from that table. Broken down by sex, race, ethnicity, and judicial district. So basically geography. And then we have the rate per 100,000. So that's looking at the prison population by how many prisoners there are per 100,000 adult Minnesotans. And that's, you see that varies quite a bit by, the rate is definitely quite a bit higher for male than for female. The rate is definitely quite a bit higher for American Indian and Black than it is for the other races. And then we get to the estimated change in prison beds needed. So we divide up those 914 prison beds that we were estimating to be used as a result of this subset of the policies. Again, this is counting some of those up rankings. But we divide those up by demographics. And then we subtracting out those changes. This brings us to the result. And we also have the percentage. The percentage means this is the share of this number by sex or race or geography. And then we get the estimated resulting prison population. So we subtract out the estimated bed reduction that we're looking at, eventual bed reduction. This is not immediate. And we see the new number, the new percentage, and then the percentage point change relative to other categories. Meaning that, for example, males used to be 92.7% of the population. It's going up to 92.9%. So the percentage point change is 0.2%. And then we get the estimated resulting rate per 100,000. And then this column here, the changing rate per 100,000 was really something that I believe it was from something that Professor Reitz had written, that this is a new statistic that we're putting in our demographic impact statements. And Professor Reitz is making the argument that this is probably the most meaningful statistic for a given population. So you can see here that for example, let's take the Black population because it's kind of interesting what happens here. The Black population is estimated to go down by 306 prison beds, which because other groups maybe go down by more, the percentage point change relative to other categories actually goes up. So the Black population is estimated to go from 37.1% to 37.5%. But then this number, it's a very significant change in terms of the rate per 100,000. It's a reduction of 90 per 100,000. With a new rate of 856 rather than 950. And I would just point out that's much higher than the white rate, which is 4. So I think it really is helpful to put in that number there. It puts the change in perspective. The biggest change in the rate per 100,000 is 158, and that's in the American Indian population. Bringing it down, right now it's over 1,100 per 100,000, which is to say that, as of July 1st, 2023, 1.1% of Minnesota's American Indian population is in prison. Approximately, and some of those might have been out-of-state folks, but it's a really high number, and this at least gets it down below 1%. It's 942 per 100. So that's I acknowledge just a fire hose of information. I hope somewhat clear, and I'm happy to take any questions. And we have two of the people who worked the hardest on the system to answer any questions.
Questions, Commissioner Fraze?
I guess, well, a comment and a question. I like this 4 quadrants thing because I think it focuses on, double person offenders being the worst, current and prior person offenses, double nons being the best in the sense that there aren't any person offenses. But then these 2 middle categories, current person, but no prior person conviction. You could say that person is going in the wrong direction. Now, we don't know his entire offending pattern. This is all we have. But nevertheless, on paper, this person didn't commit person offenses before, and now he has, and usually he. And then the third category is the opposite, that they had a person offense in the past, but the current offense is not a person offense. So you could say, well, at least the current offense is not a person offense, so they're kind of going in the right direction. And I guess, so then applying that to the text on page 6, which is about well, I don't know, it's not necessarily, I don't know how it relates to table 3, but I wanted to understand, I understand the minus beds, so minus 286 beds, those are the double person people. They're accounting for minus 286 beds. And those totals, as I understand it, are the 900 number, which is the bigger number for which you have full information. But then what I'm less sure about is these percentages in parens after that. So after 286.1, it says 31.3. Does that mean that
That's of the 914 beds. That's their share of the 914 beds.
Oh, okay.
So those 4 percentages should total 100%.
Okay. So I don't know how to pose the question statistically, but I guess just further to my initial comment about worst, best, getting worse, getting better. I guess you could say that the biggest number is minus 286 beds, which applies to the double person, worst people. But the second biggest number are the best people, the double not person offenders. So anyway.
Well, and we know that a lot of those, the ones that we're not counting, the offsetting beds that we're not counting, we know those are person offenses. So they're going to be in one of those 2 categories. We just don't know which category.
One of the first 2 quadrants.
One of the first 2, yeah, as they're bulleted here, one of the first 2.
I'm just, all this is premised on the idea that prison's expensive, we have other things to spend money on. We ought to be making sure we have room for the that people were afraid of. Those are prison minutes.
Other questions? As the preparers of the fiscal information, is there anything that you want to add?
We know that we're in a position where we can refine this.
All right, well, thank you for putting that together. I think we are moving now on to the comments section, which is probably where Commissioner Ladd is ready to tell us what you want to tell us.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, I have a lot of sort of thoughts and comments on this as I was looking at sort of our policy marathon that we've kind of gone through here in terms of looking at all of this and recognizing the consideration for the bed impact and that sort of thing. And so a couple of things that kind of jump out at me. So in the presentation that we just saw, there was some assumptions made that there wasn't consideration given credit for prison time served in local jails or early release and trying to figure that out. And I think to me that's one red flag that we should be concerned about. Because first we need to recognize, and this has come up in our prior conversations, people are currently serving prison sentences in jail. They're serving local consequences. And after multiple violations, they get revoked and get sent to prison. And they take those 200, 300, 400 days of jail credit to prison to reduce their sentence that they ultimately serve. And I think we need to be transparent in what we're saying. Someone going, I think what was in the paper was an 18-month sentence. They serve 12, they have supervised release for 6. So that's how you figure out one bed, right?
Exactly.
But somebody with 18-month sentence isn't going to prison with 0 jail credit. I mean, that's not happening. And so right out of the gate, it's kind of a false premise to think that there isn't going to be any credit as and for against that. So all of a sudden, the need for bed space and bed capacity is reduced on even that kind of sentence. I think about the kinds of sentences that are commits out of the gate for somebody with a 0 criminal history score. I never say never in the business that I'm in, but I'm going to say never here. I would be shocked if anyone could present any person who has ever been sent to prison for a felony sentence that is a commit out of the gate and they don't have a single day of jail credit. I mean, they're going to at least get arrested. They're going to get a bail arraignment and they're going to get out on bail. Even if all that happens fast, they're going to have something. But for those felony commit sentences, they're going to come with what I would say the package of some credit as and for against whatever sentence. So I think that, does reduce some of that capacity issue. Just in my own practical experience, it's very difficult, even on a departed sentence, when somebody gets revoked on probation. It takes multiple revocation proceedings before they get sent to prison. And they're getting these big, giant chunks of time. And we've talked about this before about how are we monitoring, essentially sort of doing prison sentences on an installment plan at the local correctional facilities. And I don't know that we have good data about that, but what we do know is when somebody finally does get sent to prison, in that sentencing order, the judge pronounces on that sentencing order what the actual jail credit is that they have as and for against the sentence that they're going to serve. So we do know eventually what they're coming to the prison with for that jail credit. And I do think that that's information that's important to know and to understand. And the other reason that that's important, and it goes to a comment that Professor Fraze just brought up, is that prison costs money. And so we should be using resources elsewhere. Well, when you've got somebody who is serving a local sentence and on probation and using community-based services, and they fail multiple times and they're having to go to prison, we've exhausted those resources. So the only thing left is that prison consequence. So I think, again, understanding sort of where are we throwing those resources? If we're throwing it on the front end because someone has either had a departed sentence or it was a presumed stay and they failed and eventually get sent to prison, we've exhausted those resources on the front end. So to say that the prison is costing something, that's true, but we've also had expenses to try to avoid that on the front end. And so again, recognizing that, I think the other thing to realize here in all this data is that felony population doesn't equal prison population. In the data presented, it looks like 40% of men and 80% of female is the felony population that's not in prison. And those are, to me, substantial numbers. And so our own data shows us that departure rates also are an issue, because that's part of why we're looking at sort of how offenses are ranked and such. And so I think knowing the amount of custodial time that they're actually spending in prison versus what a sentence is pronounced, I think is important. Because again, if someone is serving a 60-month prison, and by the time they actually get there, they're only serving maybe 12, 18 months of that sentence. I mean, to me, that's how we have to look at what does that mean for bed impact, because they're really not serving an 80 or 60-month sentence, less the 1/3 off. So again, I say that only because I feel like I want to be transparent and understanding that when we say these numbers, they're not absolute, they're not 100%. And I get some of the stuff is really hard to get. I'm not suggesting that. But as we look at who's going to prison, I also want to know when they're going to prison. Because when they're going to prison and what they have left says a lot about how we're expending our resources and about how much time they're actually spending in a DOC building versus taking all of their local jail time as part of their jail credit to the prison system. And a lot of these folks are riding a warrant circuit in a lot of counties. And so when they actually go, they have all these cases for which they've accumulated this jail time. So again, I think that's really, really important for us to be thinking about capacity and bed space, as opposed, not in an absolute, but understanding that these factors that you said you've not indicated, I think they really are big indicators in terms of recognizing capacity and space. So anyways, I just wanted to put that out there because I think that there's a lot to how somebody gets to the prison and what they come to prison with.
Good points for raising those. Commissioner Middlebrook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, and obviously what Commissioner Ladd said, that makes a lot of sense. We also got the back end of this too, where some of these, there's the extended incarceration time, and there's also the revocation time once they're out on supervised release, that I'm not sure where that plays in either. So you've got both, the jail credit coming in, the custody credit, and then you've also got that time that people are coming back. So those are both kind of variables that I don't know if they're really easy to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, totally acknowledge those problems. It's possible when we finish our integration project with courts that we'll figure out some of this stuff, particularly jail credit, and possibly revocations as well. I mean, right now we're kind of hoping that the known errors cancel each other out approximately. So we know that we're not calculating jail credit and we're not calculating early release like through challenge incarceration program on one hand. And we also know on the other hand that we're not counting probation revocations, we're not counting extended incarceration, and we're not counting release returns on the other hand. So those are known errors, and we're, I guess, just hoping the errors cross each other out. We cancel each other out. We do, I mean, and we know that they will to some extent cancel each other out. We just don't know whether it's going to be a perfect cancellation. Right now, we're just going with the data we have, and honestly, this is how we've been doing fiscal notes since I got there. Is we're just taking pronounced executed sentences and assuming that is the impact of it, even though we know that it's going to be more and less than that.
Commissioner Larkin.
And those are all excellent points, both on the front and back end. But I mean, big picture, the good news here is our proposal package avoids use of prison beds. I mean, it could have come out very differently, and we'd be having a very different conversation, right?
That is true.
What other comments do people have just generally on the package, and now that you're seeing that impact, or that impacts your thinking about the package? Commissioner Mueller.
I'm sure, I just want to say that the full day exercise or most of the day exercise was super beneficial for me. And then to see that kind of wrap up into this, it was, for me, at least at my short time on the commission, the most impactful discussion and back and forth that I've had. And it's helped me, I don't learn a lot. I'm listening to Commissioner Ladd, and then by the end, I'm like, I get what you're saying. That's awesome. And so from the practitioners, but last week into this, what you've presented or, what's been presented by staff has been super beneficial. I'll point that out.
Commissioner Keefe.
I really appreciate all of the data and the effort that it took to put all of that together for us so that we could see and learn and have a better sense of the impact of our decisions. I think the only thing I wanted to add is, I feel like a broken record, so I apologize, and then I'll keep saying it, that I think thinking about like moving beyond just the number of beds and, how long someone's going to be in prison, but what else can we do? And what other recommendations can we make that are going to affect change? I just spent the last 3 days with 5 coalitions, full of advocates from the Coalition Against Sexual Assault, Violence Free Minnesota, Mending the Sacred Hoop, the Minnesota Alliance Against Crime, the Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, and the Minnesota Children's Alliance, talking about restorative practices and punishment and incarceration and what's really needed. And at the end of the conversation, per usual, everyone has lots of different perspectives, but the one resounding point of agreement was sending folks to prison without having something to try to affect change does not result in justice for the victim. And multiple stories of folks who had thought that they got justice because of a conviction, but 15 years later, the person's getting released and it still feels like justice isn't done because there was nothing beyond the imprisonment that was offered for the individual. So I'm sharing this today just because I literally walked out of that meeting into this one and wanted us to hold that as we continue our conversations.
Thank you. I do think that it's important to think about the whole system, and I appreciate you continuing to bring our attention back to that. It is meaningful and to continue to have those discussions. Any other comments? I wanted to, I'm trying to think through what our path is on the package altogether, and so I was thinking today that in my memory there were 2 conversations about components of the package that we really didn't have time to get to last month. I know there were comments on the assault page that we hadn't talked through. So I do feel like we should probably make some space to make sure we have that discussion before we make any final decision. And then I know that failure to register was also a discussion that we didn't really finish. And that's also on our legislative page, so we'll get there in a minute. And then we didn't appear to reach consensus on the departure thing, so that we might, we have a potential to have a little more discussion there, just to see where we land on those things. Any of those things with the final package. So those are the things that I remember. Are there any other topics that people want to make sure we discuss before we get to final decisions on that? I mean, we also have the purposes and principles, which is next. Was there anything else that people that you in particular as a commission member wanted to make sure we discuss?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Can I just do a little "you are here"
Yeah.
interruption here? So just to kind of give us context for where we are in the process. So working backwards, so January 15th of 2026 would be the deadline for the commission to submit its proposals for changes to the sentencing guidelines for next year. And those changes would then go into effect August 1st, 2026, absent legislative intervention. So that backs that up to the January commission meeting where the commission would have to make its final decision on the policy package, which then backs us up to our December commission meeting date, which would have to be the public hearing on that policy package. And you could also have, we've had combo public hearings and commission meetings, but basically that's why we have the December meeting date so far from the January meeting, November meeting date, because that backs us to the November meeting date. So the November meeting date is the date when you'd have to make a final decision, at least an initial final decision on this policy package, subject to any public hearing comments, and a final decision in January. Of course, nothing's final until the legislature gavels out. So that brings us to the October meeting, which is next meeting. So under the second reading rule that the commission has adopted, any new ideas for the commission have to, for the commission's consideration, have to be brought up at the meeting before the final vote. So that means that the deadline for any new ideas being discussed or brought up for this particular round of policy changes is next meeting. So that's kind of my you are here thing. So we're really getting close to decision time. Where I guess I'll just leave it.
Which is why I'm trying to nail you all down. There's more to discuss next time. Mr. Larkin.
So the three things you mentioned are already on the agenda. It's just if anybody has any new ideas that we haven't previously discussed, they have to raise those.
Yeah, and ideally before the next meeting so that we could get whatever we need on that, on the agenda, and if there's any materials that we need to. Yeah.
I don't have any. I'm just trying to summarize to
Yeah.
make sure I and everybody else understand.
Okay. And then the other thing, we'll hit the purposes and principles next, but the other thing I would say is if there's any other work that we are requesting on, then that we should also put that request in now. And I will say that I am wondering if there is a way to do at least the quadrant analysis, even without the demographics, for the whole group, right? Like even without knowing demographically how that would change the population. How does it change where people just based on there? If it's possible. Calculate that one.
It'd be possible for us to put them in halves, not necessarily quadrants, because we know, like, if the current offense is a person offense, then we could put it in. It's either in this quadrant or this quadrant, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to nail, because the only way we can do the quadrants really is the same way that we do the demographics, which is that we're assuming this case right here is going to, if this policy were in effect, instead of this sentence, it would get this sentence, and either a higher or lower sentence or probation or whatever. So we're assuming a change in a particular case, a historical case. It's now going to happen to this. Well, then we take the demographics profile of that particular case and apply it to the demographic impact statement. And we also take the criminal history profile and apply it. So it's tricky to do, but again, with that refinement idea where we looked at all the other cells except for the cell we can't look at, we could get a lot closer, I think, than to having. And maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's something we can do to interpolate for one cell. We've never done that before. We've always looked at actual cases and demographic analysis on that. We don't want to make assumptions about people that aren't fair.
Well, I'd love you to try.
Okay. And I guess the thing, we just want to make sure that are there any fissures? Are there any, is there Is there anything about this package that's less of a consensus package than it was in August? This is what.
Yeah, I think that's actually the key question, folks. Have any concerns about the current package? So we're gonna assume, so for now, we'll assume that we'll take that forward. For that announcement.
I should probably say in Judge Castor's defense, he's got a really good excuse for why he's not able to communicate with us today, and he made plans before he was appointed to the commission. So.
Sorry. All right, well, one last potential component of the package could be changes to the way our purpose and principle language. So why don't we go ahead and work through that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this should look pretty familiar for those who were here for Professor Wright's presentation last. And in fact, I did include Professor Wright's materials in your meeting materials today. Please. So for your consideration today, I have basically incorporated Professor Wright's suggestions into the sentencing guidelines with a number of changes, and they're here on the bullet points on the first page. So first of all, wherever possible, we removed terms such as offender and defendant, which we haven't consistently done that before. But offender was brought up by a commission member several years ago. I think it was January of 2020, and it's still a statutory term, and I don't want to deny that, but we're just trying to reduce the use of of that particular term whenever possible, and replace it with more personal language. With bottom line being, we should never lose meaning or the intent of the commission in doing that. And I've noted the various lines where we've made those changes. Also in Professor Wright's draft, there were some unnumbered paragraphs. I've tried to avoid that and instead integrate new paragraphs more tightly with existing materials. One commissioner suggested including effective community supervision. Well, I guess that's what I took out of her suggestion. It was basically including the concept of effective community supervision among the sentencing tools to reduce future crime. Because you could read that and just think we're talking about prison, and we probably are when we're talking about incapacitation, but the other, rehabilitation is certainly something that is not uniquely accomplished in prison. It can also be accomplished in the community. And I did include effective community supervision because I think, there's been a definite trend in community supervision to look more at evidence-based practices and try to not just supervise, but effectively reduce future crime risk. There was some question at the last meeting about that clause or risk, and I set it off by commas just so it's a little more readable, I think, on line 21. And then I added a new paragraph 1A4 and renumbered the existing paragraphs 1A4 through 1A6 accordingly. And 1A4 is incorporating the material that Professor Wright would have put in section 2B. Section 2B is about determining presumptive sentences. And really, it doesn't have to do with how to determine the presumptive sentence, but it does have to do with the purpose and principles. So I thought it fit better in the purpose and principles section. And so much so that going on to the next bullet, there was actually some pretty similar language in Professor Wright's. Professor Wright had a sentence: criminal history contributes to this assessment because it adds to the defendant's blameworthiness in the commission of the current offense. There's a very similar sentence that he had in in the language that's now gonna be in 1A4. So I deleted that sentence from 1A3. And then, I hope that keeps the, and at the suggestion of Commissioner, the qualifier may is added in line 24. And again, the renumbered. So, here's what it looks like that at the end of, 1A1, we have, this was a separate paragraph. We added it to the existing paragraph and we combined the first two sentences into one sentence. Those are both still appropriately referenced in statute 24409 subdivision 5. And then down in 3 and 4 is where we lopped off a sentence that was pretty similar to a sentence included in at the end of 3 that's now included in 4. I like, I was just gonna say, this is sort of how we've been, when we do ranking exercises with the commission, we do talk about blameworthiness of the person being sentenced on one hand, and the harm that was done or risked to victims in the community on the other hand. So that is although it doesn't explicitly say it for ranking, that is certainly something the commission considers in ranking, and I appreciate the fact that it's going to be in the guidelines of this. So that's pretty much my walkthrough, Madam Chair.
Great, questions or comments from commission members? Commissioner Price.
Madam Chair, I have a wordsmithing suggestion and comment. The editing suggestion, I support adding effective community supervision to the list of how public safety is furthered. My suggestion, but I think it's a good idea. I just think instead of saying deterrence and incapacitation, including through, I would just delete the first and have means such as rehabilitation, deterrence, incapacitation, and effective community supervision. I don't know why you would use the word including. It's also kind of awkward grammatic.
This is how I drafted it initially.
What? Oh, okay.
That was my first draft. I was on the fence about that, but I had written it up exactly as you said.
Unless one wants to say that the last one is less important. We have the big three: rehabilitation, deterrence, and.
Well, and that's kind of what I thought is those are what appear in the literature. The rehabilitation, deterrence, incapacitation.
I mean, considering that a lot more people are on community supervision that are locked up at any point in time, so we better be doing that effectively as we can. And I think, and lack of effective community supervision is also a public safety problem. So anyway, that's just an editorial, but maybe if there's substance to it too, I don't know. So anyway, that, and then the comment is just, the next, we're not changing except for the thing about felons versus convicted of felonies. But, the substance of that, number 2, is the sentencing should be neutral. And I'm not suggesting there's anything in our package that we ought to try to change at this point, but if I'm reading table 3 correctly, it still shows both before and after our changes that the black per capita prison rate in Minnesota is over 9 times higher than the white. The American Indian is over 10 times higher. I'm just taking the ratio of the per capita rates, black per capita versus white per capita, Native American per capita versus white per capita. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And it's a sad fact. It's also something that has been very embarrassing to the state over the years. And people started collecting this information 40 years ago, state by state. We were very often the worst state or one of the worst states. It has a lot of reasons for that. So anyway, I guess I won't be surprised if when something like this comes out and people say you're not changing either of these numbers. You're changing, and maybe that really wasn't the point, or not something we can do and reach consensus on, but anyway, I'm saddened. But we have to do better. I'm not quite sure how, but we
Yeah.
have to try to do better.
What do people think of the wordsmithing suggestion? Head nods over here. What do folks think on the left side? My left side over here.
Could you repeat what you're asking?
So Commissioner Phrase's suggestion is, you can pull that up. Right now, it says public safety is furthered by sentences that work to reduce future crimes and victimization through means such as rehabilitation, deterrence, and incapacitation. Right now, oops, he moved it. It says including through effective community supervision. Phrase is saying change that to comma and effective community supervision.
Take out the "and" between deterrence and incapacitation.
Yeah.
Change including through, change that into "and." So it's a list of 4 things,
Strike the "and" on line 11,
right?
strike the "including through" on line 12 and substitute it with an "and." Which, as I said, is how I had drafted it at first.
This is Commissioner Keefe. I'm in support of that change.
Thanks. Thank you for your, appreciate that.
No objection.
That sound, yeah, okay. All right, so we'll make that change. All right, I feel like someone else had a hand up. Did I miss? Anyone else have comments? So I'm not looking for a vote today, but what I'm looking for is a consensus on whether to include this in the overall package of policy change. Head nods. Head nods. Okay, so we can go ahead and this in with that change. So one of our goals would be, what I'd like to do at the next meeting, I was just talking to the director prior to the meeting today, is to, put everything in front of us again with all the overstrike, underscore, and everything. So we would get basically the whole package sent to us for the next agenda for us to see everything we've done. We could have a few of those refinement conversations where it's needed. If we feel like it's in shape in October to vote on, we can. If not, then we would hold it till November and make November. So that's again what I'm saying. If there are things that want to see us talk about more, do more with, let's try to identify it so that we can do that work in October. All right. Did you have a question?
I was just
Commissioner
gonna say,
Larkin.
because we've done so much, I know it would help me, and I don't know if it would help others or if the public's following around. Maybe in terms of a document, something that's just like, here's a list of what's in there now. Increase the sentence for, ranking on this, decrease the ranking, just bullet points. So we can kind of go through and have a nice, concise list of what all the proposed changes are, in addition to all the new language and stricken language.
Okay. So that along with the package, just be like a little guide to it. Okay. Good, that's helpful. Okay. I think that's it for that discussion. So the next item on the agenda then is a list of legislative recommendations. So we have a little bit longer to refine these. They don't have to go to public hearing because they're not changes to the guidelines. So we can be working on this all the way through December. We just need to give the staff enough time to get it into the report. essentially is our goal. So what we had asked staff to do is to create a list today that we could look at of the things that we had been raised as potential legislative recommendations. So what I'd like to do is ask Nate to walk us through that, and so that we can ask questions about what the things were. There was a couple where I was like, wait, what did we say? And then what we need to try to do today is determine do we want to work on this whole list, just some of this list? What are the things that are rising to the top that we might actually want to work up as a proposal to submit along with our report? I'm gonna turn it over to Nate. Walk us through.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Right. So this is information that was collected by Leah and Matt and presented in a July staff paper. Basically what they got from, I think these are mostly gleaned from the ranking exercise and what people had suggested for statutory changes. So the first one is increasing the statutory maximum for criminal vehicular homicide or criminal vehicular operation resulting in great bodily harm where there was gross negligence and while impaired. I don't say this in the comment, but it would be a little complicated from the statute just to make a higher stat max for these and not for the others. You might get a little legislative resistance there because it's one statutory maximum right now, the way the statute's written. And to just apply a higher stat max to some provisions and not all would be a little messy. And sorry, I didn't put that in the staff comment. What I did put in the staff comment was 7 years would be a nice fit for the new severity levels. The next one is criminal vehicular operation and great bodily harm while impaired and perhaps others. The recommendation is to align with DWI's conditional release terms and collateral consequences. I was actually a little embarrassed that I did not realize that this was not already the case. I assumed that because a criminal vehicular operation or criminal vehicular homicide, actually any criminal vehicular operation, while it's impaired, is essentially a DWI plus, the DWI plus harm. And the idea that it wouldn't get at least the same collateral consequences in conditional release terms as DWI, I was actually surprised that was not the case. I don't know why that wouldn't be the case. It seems like a no-brainer. The other comment I would say on this, though, is that the legislature tends to respond more favorably to recommendations that have specific language in them in specific terms. So maybe I could write this up with specific cross references to statutes that should either be referenced in the criminal vehicular operation, criminal vehicular homicide statute. I would say it should apply to all of them. I don't know why it wouldn't apply to, regardless of the harm, but just maybe flesh this out a little bit as far as specifics. I suspect that would be more favorably received by the legislature. The next one is criminal vehicular operation, great bodily harm while impaired.
I'm sorry, was there a question? Commissioner Middlebrook?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just follow up on Nate's point. I think under the conditional release has a provision that lists that. I think that might be one of the easiest ways to propose it to the legislature.
Yeah, the conditional release statute.
Yeah, and I
I
think
don't have it in front of me, so I don't know exactly how that reads.
I'll be happy to dig into that. Come up with it for October. All right, then there's criminal vehicular operation, great bodily harm while impaired, create a high severity offense if prior conviction. So you'll recall there is a provision like this in the criminal vehicular homicide statute. And I just want to be really clear about that criminal vehicular homicide statute. So that's not any prior DWI that qualifies you for what you're proposing to rank to severity level 9. That has the higher stat max. It's got to be actually. It's only certain DWIs. Essentially, it's almost like, I think I'm saying this right. It's where your record of DWIs is such that the next DWI is going to be a felony. I think that's accurate to say. So you're pretty far along the DWI experience ladder, and now you're committing another DWI that would be a felony, and you kill somebody in committing that DWI. That's where it goes to the severity level 9 criminal vehicular homicide. And I think the cleanest way to do this would be to do the same thing. Essentially, there's already a term defined to just use that same term for great bodily harm and have that be a higher stat max as well, which then the commission could uprank. That makes sense?
Yeah, and I'll say that I was the one that proposed this because when I was looking, I realized that if you have another one of these, it's more effective to charge a DWI than a CVO with great bodily harm because it doesn't go up. Huh?
Yeah, that's great.
And so I was like, it just didn't make any sense to me that you might have one of these in your past and then you do it again. But the best we're gonna charge is a DWI, which doesn't recognize the harm that was done because the DWI doesn't require harm. It just felt really out of whack. And so it felt like there might need to be some place to go to recognize a repeat. Anyway, so that was just like the little rabbit hole that I went into when we were doing rankings.
All right, so the next is fleeing, great bodily harm, increase the stat max. 7 years, and then it says need more discussion. I would say 7 years does fit the existing severity level 6. So this doesn't seem to have without an increase above severity level 6. It's like the proposal to increase this one to severity level to 7 years because of severity level 6. This is already at severity level 6. I'm not sure it's a change. Same thing with fleeing substantial bodily harm. 5 years is ample for the existing severity level 4. So from a guidelines point of view, there's no strong impetus to change it, but there may be other reasons to change it. And then even fleeing, there's another conversation that we're going to get to about fleeing, but increasing the stat max currently 3 years is ample for the existing severity level. Now, there's some question about whether that'll stay at severity level. The next recommendation is create penalties for non-harm offenses and endanger public safety. And I will just say I never was a forfeiture attorney, but it always seemed to me that there could be, there's a forfeiture standard for endangering life or property. So basically the prosecutor has to prove, they bring in the conviction for the fleeing, but then also prove that the fleeing endangered life or property. And I always thought, why don't they just make a more serious offense for endangering life or property? So that's one way to look at it is if, and I'm not saying the purpose of the Sentencing Guidelines Commission is to make, civil attorneys in the county attorney's office easier, but I mean, it wouldn't make things line up and I think be more certain for people who are at risk of getting their vehicles forfeited if it were the same standard as the forfeiture.
Before you move on
Yes.
for that, Commissioner Middlebrook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. Isn't the legislature last session look at some of those fleeing, but they didn't make it through, so that may be coming back again.
Could be.
It, you know, and I think some of those were where they were running, you know, increasing the penalties for, you know, running stoplights and the excessive speed. I mean, there was a lot of different,
I was gonna say that there were different versions.
yeah, there were a lot of different versions on that I recall.
That's essentially the point that I was gonna make. You know, like there's two ways we can go here. I think the legislature it might take this back up because there were a lot of bills, but it was one of those compressed timeframe legislatures, so they didn't have time to really work through all of those issues. So I think that the interest is still there on the legislative side to address fleeing. So on one hand, we could consider waiting until they do their job. On the other hand, if there's something that we want to add to that conversation, this would be an opportunity to also do that. So I would say if there's a commission member who, or a couple of commission members who really do think there's some things that we should say that might add to the conversation, like that could be something that a couple of people might work on and bring to us. So that's another way to go too. Commissioner Mueller?
I mean, I'm just not confident that the legislature, even if there is interest, is gonna have the capacity, or the, you know, clearly the timeline to address it. Might be some interest in it, but just there's so many other things happening with that. So I think our group shouldn't just wait and say, you know, like if we had a bunch of gun bills, you know, maybe knowing there might be a special session coming up, maybe we'd sit tight on that. Just, I think projecting that they may talk about it next session. We went through this process of recommendation.
Yeah, so we would just need some direction on what sorts of things the commission would be talking about. Also see Commissioner Keefe's hand up.
I was gonna say I would be willing to be on a small group to talk about it. I know from from this meeting I was just in, that there are some legislators that are saying that they're committed to focusing on some of this in the next year. We will see what happens. But I think it would be, like, I would be open to being part of a group if folks did want to talk about it preemptively.
Thank you.
And I guess, I'm sure, do you want to talk about these three as well, the statutory maximums?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the staff would need direction on, there was some discussion about this, but not specific. The staff would need is something that commission. Oh, Commissioner Keith has her hand up. Commissioner Keith.
Sorry, I just forgot to put it down.
Oh, okay. I noticed.
I'd just say from a strategy point of view, probably the fewer the recommendations, the punchier they'll be. And if we're not re-ranking these, it doesn't seem like there's really much to be gained from stat max.
Yes.
All right, so this has to do with mandatory minimums on assault 2, and the suggestion is to reserve the mandatory minimum for firearm and or second or subsequent offenses. Right now, other dangerous weapons will qualify for a year and a day mandatory minimum, or if it's a repeat, 3-year mandatory. My editorial comment was, is it perhaps more powerful to wait to endorse the recommendations of the task force mandatory minimum sentences next year? Those will come out in August of 26. And I'm sure they'll be looking at this. I can't imagine they won't be looking at something.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense to wait.
I would agree too, and I think that one of the things that could be the net effect, if we don't wait and we try to do something, we gotta change, we might be changing it again. And so I don't know how effective that would be either.
Assault for a peace officer, suggestion was to increase the stat max. I will say existing 3 years does fit the new upranked severity level 3. Assault for firefighter, EMS, corrections, et cetera, increase the stat max from 2 years. I would agree that 3 years would be a better fit. There wasn't a suggestion as to what to increase it to, but 3 years would be a better fit at the new severity level 3. And the same thing is true of the bias. Right now, it's a year and a day, so it's extremely low. It's not gonna fit at all at the increase for severity level 3. But a 2 or preferably 3. So 2, I think bumps up against it at the upper ranges. So 3 would be a little roomier to permit the whole guidelines presumptive sentence to be in play. So I guess I could see just a blanket suggestion to make all felony assault 4s 3-year stat max.
How do people feel about that one? We didn't give specific direction before. Yeah,
I think so.
okay.
And then assault 4 generally defined demonstrable bodily harm consistent with case law.
That was mine. I just thought it was annoying. But there was no, there was no definition in the statute. The only place I could find it in the statute.
Is that the recommendation, that it's annoying that there's a definition? Can you fix it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, apparently there's a definition in case law.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty well known by the people that are in practice.
But not to the normal, the general.
Right, assault 1, create a new crime for intentional infliction of great bodily harm. So this is sort of the offense that would make sense being ranked at severity level 9 right now. Assault 1s where there's great bodily harm, but it was not intended. All that was intended was a simple assault. But great bodily harm resulted. That's it would make sense to me to keep that at 20 years and then possibly decrease the stat max for the existing crime to 15, just to kind of show that it's less serious. But
Question.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, what's the stat max for the other great bodily harm ones that are severity level 8? What's the stat max on those?
wrote a paper
Kyra's
once.
gonna pull it out for you. She's always got it ready.
What are you asking for? Which ones?
The severity level 8 great bodily harm ones.
There's several different ones. There's a 10-year for the criminal abuse one of a vulnerable adult. 10-year for another vulnerable adult one. They're 10 years. Trafficking is 20. Malicious punishment of a child is 10. So that one is 20 years, but otherwise they're all 10. That maxing.
I think we had a pretty robust discussion on this one at last month, and there was some interest in recommending a separate offense. Am I remembering that correctly? Commissioner Larkin?
I have a question for those who are in the know. What's the intent that must be proved? Is it the intent just to do the act or the intent to cause the specific harm? Both?
For this
For what the proposed. That's what.
current law,
Current law, I'm saying.
current law,
Current is
it's
just,
the intent for the assault.
yeah, it's just the misdemeanor assault.
So if you know, somebody, if I have my back to a bonfire and somebody's mad at me and hits me in the face, you know, that's all they intend to do, and then I fall back in the bonfire and get great bodily harm, they've committed an assault in the first degree. And the idea is to differentiate that between that and somebody who throws somebody into a bonfire intentionally, intending to cause great bodily.
Commissioner Price.
I don't have the data in front of my mind now, but on the felony murder, aiding and abetting felony murder task force round 2, and you may remember this, Nate, we did a national survey because one of the problems with felony murder is the assault law that says case like Nate's can be murder. And so we look, well, how many, just looking at the law of assault, how many states do what we do? And say it all depends on the harm, not in your intent, degree of intent. And I think it's fair to say that we're in a substantial minority there. Most states say, if you're going to call it that serious a crime, we ought to prove that you intended that much harm. So anyway, short of, I mean, it's in a way not squarely in our wheelhouse to talk about the law of assault generally, but I think this proposal addresses part of that problem.
So this is also a mandatory minimum failure to register. Don't know if the task force on mandatory minimum sentences will get to this one. The reason I say it is, like 75% of the crimes for which there are mandatory minimums, 75% of the crimes that are within the scope of a mandatory minimum are 6 and 9/11 crimes. So they might spend all their time on 6 and 9/11 for all I know. But there's a good chunk that are failure to register, and it might get to those as well. There's also a good chunk that are drugs. But the question is whether to refine the mandatory minimum for failure to register to limit it to specific behaviors, second or subsequent, avoiding or lying to police, etc. And my comment is would it be more powerful to wait to endorse recommendations of the task force? But that's assuming the task force gets to this one. I don't know.
I would say I would love to see this move forward.
Okay.
If the task force doesn't get to it, I think this is such a meaningful change as someone who supervises predatory offenders. Love to see this. I would hope that they get to it, especially how many federal registered charges come.
And I will say that the way the failure to register criminal penalties are structured, there's basically 2 things you can do to fall within the criminal statute there. And one is you can intentionally violate one of the many regulations. And then the second one is lying to, I don't know if it's your probation officer, but it's like making a false statement. So that's captured there. And then there is also second or subsequent, which is captured on the penalty side right now. So we could, this recommendation, it does kind of fit in nicely with the existing statutory structure. All right.
What do others think about that one in comparison to our approach on?
I personally would, again, agree to wait, because I feel like regardless of maybe what our recommendation will be, it might partner with what their recommendations are, or if it's not, and then I think, we could address it that way. But I just feel like getting ahead of something and then having to change it because their recommendations are adopted, it doesn't seem like making changes like that sort of in quick succession is good policy. So somebody else is kind of working on it. And again, I get wanting to move things along, and government doesn't move quickly. But it just feels to me like if we're going to wait on the other aspects of the mandatory minimums, I don't know why we would carve this one out of that bucket. So that's just kind of where I look at that.
I agree, Madam Chair, with everything Commissioner Ladd just said. I don't think we should get out in front of the legislature. I think we'd be wise to dial this back and see what the recommendations are and happening.
And then the final one, Madam Chair. Hope I'm not cutting. Felon in possession, and this would also be a 60911 issue. This is actually the most common single offense for which there is the creation of a mandatory minimum. I shouldn't say that. It makes it sound like mandatory minimums are applied most commonly. I don't know that, but I know that this is the statute that falls within the scope of a mandatory minimum penalty. And then this has to do with felon in possession. Mandatory minimums are reserved for specific conditions. Staff comment again. This is almost. I would have a very surprised if the task force didn't look at this penalty just because it is the most common. Yeah, probably be first on the.
Wonder if it would make sense for us in our report to just identify that this came up and that these are three areas that we were interested in looking at, but because of the creation of the task force, we deferred. We held off on looking at it until they could do their work. Because then, like you said, we actually might be able to swoop in and endorse recommendations or work with them to share some of the things that we've learned. Interview information collected, just to have some with at the, but at least it flagged for the noted that there were some issues here.
In full disclosure, and I think I've told you this before, but I am a voting member of the task force, as is the chair. So I suppose there could be a conflict of interest since I don't have a vote in this body, you know. But I hope that's not influencing my comments.
I think that our intention of wanting them to know that this is important for us, that it's getting looked at and giving deference to them, I think would probably go a long way in that process. And so I think communicating that would be really important.
What is our position, though? I mean, are we saying we think you should eliminate mandatory minimums for felons in possession, or just that that's something that was of interest to us? We're not going to go any further with it until the task force has an opportunity to complete its work.
I'm sorry. I would just suggest that just that, in general, not have a position one way or the other because we haven't voted on a position here. And so I would just say a felon possession, failure to register, that we would those are the areas that we're looking at. We're just looking at that specific time, the mandatory.
Commissioner Saxena.
I just have a question about the task force. So, I'm looking at the task force page. There isn't any information about sort of the agenda for the task force. I'm curious whether either of you that are members of it can tell us more about the process that's going to be followed. And then I also just wanted to add, I guess I have some concerns about limiting both of your discretion to raise whatever issues you would like as part of the task force. In other words, I guess maybe another way to put it is I'm curious about what role the Sentencing Commission has to make recommendations or statements to that group.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. The Sentencing Commission is an independent body. And so if there if there are things that we want to say to that task force, we, as a body, we definitely can. I've toyed with the idea of seeing if there might even be one joint meeting with that group. We'll see, you know, I don't even know. I'll tell you that I can't tell you anything about the process yet because the commission or that task force just now has enough members to create a quorum. We've been waiting on appointments. We have enough now to have a quorum. They're meeting in September, and under the statute, they have to elect their own chair and vice chair, so we won't know who that is until after that meeting. And then that, you know, that obviously once that happens, that's gonna start to set the direction of the work that they do.
How many people are on that task force?
Not very many.
That's 12.
There's a statute though, Commissioner Sextina and everybody, there is a I can ask Nate to circulate the statute that sets their charge. So that much we do know. Commissioner, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Sextina.
I was just going to say the statute is here. I guess I'm very I think I agree with what commissioners have said about not having disparate recommendations if there's room to agree. But I guess I'm a little bit concerned not knowing how long that task force's work is going to take. That we might be missing an opportunity on some of these recommendations. And so part of me feels like, you know, if we're just waiting for something that may never be addressed by the other group, that, you know, we should, you know, not wait too long, I guess. I'm fine with waiting a month or two to see what the agenda of that group is, but I'm not sure that we should table this forever. I guess that's my point.
And I'll respond to just one of those under the enabling statute for this commission. That task force is a short-term task force, and they are tasked with submitting their report by August of 2020. So and then they're done. So we do know at least that much, that if they don't address it by August, they're not going to address it. But Commissioner Middlebrook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The other, if we're gonna, I mean, I agree that I think we should include something in the report to the legislature that, you know, we've identified these, and I think, I mean, it's accurate that these are some of the highest departure rates, and that's why they don't fit in with the guidelines. So I think that's pretty, you know, that's a statement we can put in the report as to why we're looking at them and, you know, decide, I guess, better on the language. But I think though that statement for sure is accurate, because those three are the highest, you know, they're huge departure rates.
Yeah.
I'm sure. And I appreciate that. I'm just really careful of making any statement, and I feel like that could guide or allow the legislature to generalize a position from this commission without us having that through a discussion. So I don't disagree with you. I'd be really, really careful on the wordsmithing of that. And I feel like if we just identify those, this thing, you know, as areas that we're looking at that are areas of interest, and just let that sit for the task force and the legislature, just let that sit, and then they can come to us or a joint meeting, or if they don't address it, then we can address it at that.
Right.
You know, I usually do a preamble, and I don't know why I didn't, but to Commissioner Saxena's point about authority and that sort of thing, just that the commission, as you probably all know, but perhaps I can remind you, is mandated from time to time to make recommendations to the legislature regarding matters of criminal law, criminal procedure, and other aspects of sentencing. So there's essentially a dual mandate going on right now with the task force, because there's clearly some overlap between the commission's standing mandate and the task force's temporary mandate.
Commissioner Larkin?
My only concern is, we've talked about so many things. I don't know, and I don't recall if like we had a firm majority of the people who said, yes, we think the mandatory minimums for felon in possession should be eliminated. I don't know that I would vote for that. I don't know that we voted on it. I don't know if we just talked about it. So I don't feel that we're in a position where we could say a majority of the sentencing guidelines believes that there shouldn't be mandatory minimums for felons in possession. My memory could be wrong, but I'm having this uncomfortable feeling that we're taking an issue that wasn't decided and, you know, suggesting to another group that, well, maybe you guys should take care of this because this is what we want to do.
No, I don't think, I would agree that we did not reach any consensus on position. What I think we have done is we've identified, we saw high departure rates in some of these areas. We identified that mandatory minimums were probably the driver.
Sure.
Because had the mandatory not been there, the guideline sentence might have been in line with what the person got in many of those cases, not all of them. And then we also got stakeholder input to give us more information about what stakeholders thought about those mandatory minimums. So I think at best, we would be saying we identified this as an issue, that it's also intertwined with departure rates. And if that we could potentially share, U of M could share what they learned from stakeholders, but none of that is our position. So if that's okay with everyone, I think that would be the extent of any sharing that we did with that task force. And that would be a position. Then I think if they don't do something with it, we still have all that information. And we'd also then have whatever they come up with. So if we want to take it up again further down the road, we definitely could.
Another question, Madam Chair, for the task force, obviously they're going to get a lot of the data that we got as well that show these high departure rates, right?
Right. Yeah, because that, like, getting info from the sentencing guidelines is right in their charter. So the commission will be asked to provide data. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's like an information sharing thing, but I think both of us would be very clear that the commission did not establish a position.
And that we're not making any recommendations. We're simply saying this is an issue that.
Right. Yep. Okay. I think that we did pretty good. Going through there. I think that takes care of that agenda.
Based on our discussion, I could just write something up that looks a little more like a actual recommendation to the legislature in a package.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay. Gosh, we're just moving along so much faster than I thought we would this fall. Like, I'm so proud of you.
We did double duty last month,
Holy
so we
moly.
should get out early.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to. We're going to, because number 6 is so easy. We have to look at our meeting calendar for 2021 and approve it.
Well, and I would take the position, Madam Chair, respectfully, that this is a formula that the commission has adopted, so I don't even think you need to approve it. You just need to object if you've got an objection. But
I think you're right.
Unless there's an objection, this formula has been previously adopted by a previous commission. So, what do you think? If there's any objection, we could look at that. But otherwise, this would be the 2026.
And just for the benefit, we have some new members that weren't here before. So the calendar gets a little weird in June and July and November, December, because right now we have additional timing requirements for public hearings. And so in order to allow for the spacing, the correct spacing of those meetings, that's why June has to be moved earlier in the month. And same with November, they have to be moved up a little bit earlier to allow us time so that if at the June and November meetings, we decide to move something forward to public hearing in July or December, we have adequate time to post notice according to our rules. That's why it's weird. All right, so I'm not seeing any objections. Great.
Yep, August looks great.
Zero. Yeah, we haven't had a zero August meeting in a little while. Okay, all right, so we will go with Nate's object only rule. And then we can move on to executive director's report. You can call for a public hearing, public comment.
I think I've spoken enough, man. I'm gonna give you a break.
You don't have anything to tell us this month?
I think I said it all. I really wanted to just emphasize the calendar that's coming up, but I've already stated that. Just the next meeting is the last meeting to bring forward a new.
Can I just, then Commissioner Larkin, on the December meeting, the 18th, would that be a combined meeting, public hearing, or is there another date we should put on our calendar? Or we're thinking combined?
It's yeah, it's typically if we have a public hearing, we've done both on that day. Yeah, and then it's January where that's the time where we have that meeting. We
Decide in
we
January.
decide in January. We have to decide 5 days later, but we do it in January.
And will there be a remote option for December?
Oh, yeah, okay. Fabulous. All right,
So,
public input.
thank you, Madam Chair. So there is one call-in user who probably cannot raise his or her hand. So if there are any members of the public who are in attendance who would like to make a public comment, would you please press the raise your hand button on your device. And I'm going to temporarily unmute call-in user 2 with a 218 area code, just to give you a chance to make a statement if you'd like to make a statement. So I'm going to unmute you for about 5 seconds. I'm not going to ask you any questions. Just going to tell you you're on mute, and then if you would like to make a statement, please let us know. Then I'm going to mute you again.
Hi, everyone. This is Michelle Hipseg from Northern Minnesota. Thanks for allowing me to attend. I haven't been to the meetings for quite a while, so I'm quite behind on things, so I apologize on that. So please forgive any of my ignorance in not knowing all of what's going on. But first off, I want to say thank you for everything that you guys do and all your work on getting the numbers and all of that. It is really appreciated, and the presentations of everything. I will have to look more, I guess, at these increased DUI stats. I don't know if all of you know, my history personally with it is that my grandson and daughter were hit by an impaired driver. And actually my grandson passed, and I did CPR on him for a few minutes before the medics got there. It was a very harrowing event, and you know, still one that we live with every day. But you know, the increased penalties for repeat DUIs and everything, I hear all the time that there isn't enough punishment for it. There isn't enough. I mean, I hear it all the time from other family members, and the anger and frustration. I honestly don't know what the answer is. I have been going down the rabbit hole myself with just trying to look for a end goal of potentially solving and eradicating this problem, because it has unfortunately been an onion of multi-layers. Hold on just a minute. But anyways, sorry about that. My other grandson just came in the room. Anyways, with the offender that hit the kids, we did receive the maximum for it. He hit them and he fled and left. potentially endangering more people. He was under the influence of methamphetamine. And I, of course, advocated and wanted the maximum penalty for him because he was a repeat offender. He was a multiple time offender, and this wasn't the first scenario for him. And unfortunately, I had to be, the grown up that was pushing for it, saying that, when children do things, we have a timeout and we redirect them. And, I really felt like I was having to be put in that situation of having to basically say, okay, you need a timeout, you need a redirection, you need a stop point, because you can't be doing this to people and ultimately himself. So anyways, he ended up with the maximum. Now he got let out with Stillwater and everything closing, and he was on that reduction. So he's out on work release now. I actually tried, because I have studied with recidivism rates and with restorative justice, and I actually wanted to meet with him myself, because part of the goal for me was making sure that he was stopped for a while, but I also want him to be a better person when he gets out than what he went in as. And, in seeing this, I didn't get the opportunity to discuss anything with him. He's now on work release. And my other question was to the State Department was, well, he doesn't have any college education. Ultimately, he needs to have something so he doesn't end up going back into the life that he was in prior and potentially doing this again. And, what I found out, which you may correct me if I'm wrong, was that they have the option and during incarceration to have 2 years of education provided, but that is an option to them that they can choose or they cannot choose. Well, obviously he didn't choose it. If they don't have an education and they don't have anything, we need to have a better system as far as a better setup, because otherwise it's just a setup for failure and a setup for more problems for others, for themselves. There is a definite break here. And I just think that there needs to be more focus on the end game goal of what are we doing instead of just, it's great to focus on numbers and prison beds and reduction of costs, but what are we doing for the actual reduction of society? Because when it all boils down to it, those stats, those dots on that map are people. And every one of those people matter, whether they're the victims or the offenders. Everybody matters, and we need to do better. We can do better. We should do better. And I just want you guys to remember this when you're making your decisions, that you guys have so much influence and power to make change and positive change. And like I said, I don't know what all the answers are. I mean, I hear complaints all the time that people want stiffer penalties. I do think people need a timeout if they are repeat offenders. They need some type of redirection. But my concern is that they're not getting it. He wasn't told you need to get an education, you need to do something so you're not going back out. I don't know if he's going to reoffend. I don't know. We don't know, but history, he has. So I hope and pray not. But did we implement those things that will help him to be a better person when he is completely free? I mean, or are we just setting up another trajectory of failure? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do appreciate you sharing your story, and I think that much of what you said, that we all share those sentiments, that we need to do better, and that we're always looking for the most effective way to work with people who
Thank you.
better.
Yes, and I am willing to answer any questions. If you guys ever want to talk to me, I am happy to work with you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Great. Was there anyone else who wanted to make a public comment today?
Is it raised, Madam Chair?
Okay. Great. Well, thanks for your work today. I am going to let you go early, and we will see you next month. And unless there is an objection, meeting is adjourned. Have a good afternoon.
Every once in a while, as a teacher, you run out of material. And